Mr. President, I rise today to speak about the ongoing effort here in the Senate to block earmark reform. It has now been 175 days, over 6 months, since we passed our earmark transparency rules, yet they still have not been enacted. As my colleagues know, we passed two important earmark transparency rules back in January that first require public disclosure of earmarks and second, prohibit Congress from adding secret earmarks behind closed doors in conference committees where they cannot be openly debated or voted on. Both of these rules were unanimously supported by the Senate, but now, over 6 months later, Democrats are insisting that we change or drop these rules behind closed doors. Mr. President, I asked the Majority Leader before July 4th if we could agree to protect these earmark reforms in conference, but he said no. I'm not asking for an ironclad agreement. He said that they would change in conference. I asked him what changes he wanted to make to these important earmark rules that had passed unanimously, but so far we don't have a response. In fact, in Congressional Daily AM, they put it quite clearly when they said, and I quote, that Democrats could not guarantee that DeMint's earmark language would survive negotiations with the House. I would only correct one thing about that quote. This was actually Nancy Pelosi's language, modified slightly by Senator Durbin, and voted on unanimously here in the Senate. They're hardly my earmark requirements. Well, there you have it, Mr. President. After stalling and blocking the enactment of these important ethic reforms for over 6 months, and after coming up with every excuse in the book to put them off, the Democrat leadership is now beginning to admit that they plan to kill earmark reform. It is now day 175 of business as usual in the United States Senate, and the party that said it would clean up the culture of corruption in Washington is already embracing it. Mr. President, the Majority Leader and the Majority Whip made several statements on this issue on the floor the other night, and I want to address them. First, the Majority Leader said that my efforts to protect earmark reform were a ploy, a diversion, and a smokescreen to stop the ethics bill. And this accusation is completely false, and these two senators are probably the only two people in America who believe it. I voted for the lobbying and ethics bill, and I even support it going to conference. In fact, I came to the floor on Monday and asked for consent to adopt the earmark transparency rules and go to conference with the House on the ethics bill. But the other side objected because they only want to move forward on the ethics bill if they can gut the earmark reforms in secret. The truth is that the only thing stopping the lobbying and ethics bill from moving forward is the Democrat leadership and their desire to kill meaningful earmark reform behind closed doors. They may want to hide their opposition to transparency by accusing me of having a secret plan to kill the bill, but Americans know the truth. They know folks here in Congress love earmarks and will do anything to keep this process secret and easy for members to designate money to their pet projects. It's clear the only thing stopping this bill is obstruction to earmark reform. Next, the Majority Leader said it was a fantasy for anyone to think they would kill earmark reform behind closed doors. Again, I'm not sure how these things can be said with a straight face. Several senators on the other side, including the Majority Leader himself, have publicly said they intend to change these rules behind closed doors, but they won't say how they're going to change them. If this is all a fantasy, then why won't they tell us what they plan to do with these reforms? This is supposed to be a bill about transparency, but the other side wants to rewrite it in secret. But setting aside for a moment the fact that they have publicly admitted they plan to change these rules, we need to realize that it's earmark reform we're talking about here. The culture of earmarking runs very deep in this town, and it's no fantasy that there are many in this body on both sides of the aisle who want to preserve that culture. Next, the Majority Leader said that Democrats are already complying with the rule, and therefore we should trust them. The truth is, Mr. President, that the earmark disclosure the Democrats have given us is spotty at best. In fact, the Congressional Research Service says that only 4 committees out of 18 have implemented even an informal disclosure rule. Even worse, it says that these 4 informal rules cannot be enforced on the floor of the United States Senate. The defense bill we are debating right now is a perfect example. The committee put out a partial list of the earmark sponsors, but it's failed to make public the letters from these earmark sponsors certifying that they have no financial interest in the projects that they have requested. This is a recipe for more Duke Cunninghams, Mr. President. It's a recipe for corruption. Congressional Quarterly put it quite clearly when it stated, and I quote, "The earmarks listed in the defense bill for the first time ever would not have been published at all had most Democrats on the Senate Armed Services Committee gotten their way." End quote. But the Democrat leadership wants us to trust them anyway. They want us to trust the people writing the earmarks to follow the rules without any accountability. It won't work, and the defense bill is a perfect example. It's also important to note that the Democrats have done nothing to address the practice of adding secret earmarks in closed-door conference committees. As my colleagues know, one of our earmark transparency rules prohibits this awful practice. The Democrats in the House have been trying to get away with adding their earmarks in secret without any oversight. And now Senate Democrats are blocking a rule to stop it on our side. Mr. President, everyone knows the game around here. Everyone knows that if you want a questionable earmark, you just wait until the bill gets to conference and then you slip it in where it cannot be seen, where it cannot be debated, and where it cannot be stopped. Nothing has been done to stop this practice. The majority leader may believe Democrats have been transparent enough, but it's clear that they have not. And that's why we need a rule that will hold us all accountable.